My name is Csaba Szabo. I was born in Transylvania. I was studying in Romania and Hungary. As baseline, I'm an economist and I consider myself an entrepreneur. And in the past couple of years, I've been commuting between Central and Eastern Europe and Silicon Valley. I also studied at Singularity University, and I'm just starting an executive MBA at Stanford. As baseline, I'm an economist, and I was working in strategy. Over 4.5 years, I was doing strategy and management consulting, which literally means that I was helping large corporations, blue chip corporations, figure out what the future will bring for them and how they can adapt to this environment. However, many times I realized that our predictions weren't accurate, and I didn't know why. And soon I realized that it's because technology is changing so dramatically fast. And for corporations, it's very hard to comprehend these exponential changes. So I decided to go back to study, and I chose a very special program at NASA Ames in Silicon Valley called Singularity University, a think tank based in NASA Ames that actually is working on the impact of these technologies on society, on business, and the future. And I studied there for 10 weeks, and in the past couple of years I've been trying to spread that knowledge. I've been trying to adapt that knowledge to help corporations scale and have a larger impact. It's very interesting, even though I consider myself an entrepreneur, because I started my first company at age 19. And I've been doing consulting for 4.5 years, as mentioned, for mainly working for blue chip companies in Central and Eastern Europe. And then I worked for 40 years in the energy sector. I helped a company scale from 12 employees to 500 and have a huge regional expansion, even be listed on the stock exchange and reach a market capitalization of $120 million. And I also worked in the energy industry for really large corporations such as Gaz de France Suez, and I saw kind of the both sides of the coin. Like how large corporations are trying to adapt to this environment, and also in the past 1 year I've been deeply involved with startups. I've been investing in startups. I've been helping startups to bootstrap. I've been helping startups to build a bridge in Silicon Valley, get funding there, and start scaling. So I could see how startups are actually leveraging these technological changes from scratch in order to scale and really reach high market valuations. Let me give you an example. One of the most interesting stories coming out of Silicon Valley in the past 2 years was Oculus Rift, a company which is actually predestined to manufacture virtual reality glasses. But they did not manufacture yet. They only manufactured a couple of batches of these glasses, which a couple of people tried out, such as myself, and we found it really immersive. It's really high tech. However, in the past 2 years, this company, from having a promise and having a couple of prototypes and having a valuation of $2 million, went to, and I repeat it, in less than 2 years, actually 18 months. They went from a valuation of $2 million to $2 billion, and they were sold to Facebook. So they are the new startups, not only in Silicon Valley, but also in Central and Eastern Europe or any part of the world. They are leveraging these changes to really grow very fast. However, for large corporations, this mentality is not part of their DNA. When you talk to them, they don't understand these changes. So for them, it's very difficult to adopt. Large corporations still don't understand when you tell them that, okay, this market is going to grow, let's say, by 300% in the next 1 year, then they just don't get it. They just say, oh, no, it's going to be like 10%, maybe 8%, etc., etc. So what is the difference between linear thinking and exponential thinking? Because, as mentioned, actually a lot of large corporations act and think linearly, while startups tend to think more exponential, and they thus go for a higher, more aggressive growth pace. So I usually use a very simple example to explain that. If you take linearly 30 steps, then it's very easy to calculate where you're going to be at 1/3 of the path, 2/3 of the path, and the end of the journey. If I take one step as 1 meter and I make 30 steps, then I'm going to end up 30 meters. If I take these 30 steps exponentially, then it's very hard to predict where I'm going to be at, right? Because at first I make one step, it's 1 meter, then I make 2 meters, 4 meters, 8 meters, 16 meters, and so on. So this is actually 30 doublings, which leads to 1 billion steps. 1 billion steps is 26 times around the planet. And it's very hard to predict where I'm going to be at 1/3 of the passage and where I'm going to be 2/3 on the way. So these startups tend to grow like out of the blue. Like if you look at Facebook, you know, like there were so many social networks and nobody was really predicting that, okay, this Facebook is going to survive or they're going to surpass anybody. The same with WhatsApp, you know, everybody's using WhatsApp, and WhatsApp was growing also exponentially. In 4 years, they went from 0 to 500 million users. That's huge. That's really huge. And you know, for 2.5 years, nobody ever heard about WhatsApp because they were still, you know, having these little doublings. They had like 5,000 users, 10,000 users, you know, 20,000 users, so nobody really noticed them. But suddenly when they were adding up 100 millions of users every half year, of course nobody could ever stop them, right? Like it was like a huge tsunami hitting the tech world, and that's why they value it so high. It's very interesting because the exponential pace of technology has 3 effects. One is that everything becomes digital, everything dematerializes, and it becomes democratic. I mean democratic by it loses value. Most of the things for which we were paying hundreds of dollars even 5 years or 10 years ago, like let me give you an example, a flashlight or a simple camera, it comes for free because you buy a phone, but your phone is not anymore just a phone, right? You have so many things in it, and all those extra things, which are applications, they just come for free. So it democratizes the technology by giving it for free to everybody. And this causes a lot of distress. First of all, it causes disruption in large corporations and also in society. You can see that it causes revolutions, such as the Arab Spring, such as, you know, I don't need to mention a couple of countries, but if you're just following the news, then many countries are attacking actually tech companies because it democratizes the information and the information flow between people. So it causes disruption. So many people are afraid that this disruption by you know, swiping away jobs, having large corporations fail at the split of a second. So there are 2 things I'm actually afraid of happening regarding exponential technology. One is that people start to ignore it. They say, oh, this is not going to happen. You know, Facebook is just going to come and it's just going to pass by Bulgaria. Nobody's going to use it, right? Or WhatsApp. And that's not true. Technology is here. Everybody is using it. And it's part of our life, and it becomes part of our life extremely fast. So we cannot really ignore it. But people still tend to believe that they can ignore the pace of change, and they can not act upon it, not to learn about it. Second is aggression. Once people realize that this is happening, once people realize that robots are literally taking over our jobs, so people tend to say that, okay, this is against the machines, it's the robots who are doing it. But actually we are doing it to ourselves because we are ignorant and we don't invest in ourselves to kind of develop, to learn, to find our passion, find our niche, because there are so many areas that we can excel in. Let me give you an example. 150 years ago, everybody was working in agriculture. You know, 80% of the people were working in agriculture everywhere. Now, in Bulgaria, 7% are working in agriculture. In the US, it's less than 3%, right? And nobody is really complaining, right? Like, what if my father would have came to me and said, you know, Csaba, you shouldn't go to university. I have a little land and you should work on it, right? You should be getting into agriculture. You know, I would really freak out. Well, let me give you another alternative. What if my father would have came and said, like, look, Csaba, you don't need to go to university. You can go and work in a factory, right? I don't want to work in a factory. I want to use my mind. I want to use my creativity, my human side, my feelings, my emotions, my connections to work with other people to create something new, something which adds more value to the life of other people. Is it difficult for older people to adapt to these changes? Is it difficult for anybody who is in their comfort zone? They are having a well-paid job, let's say in the banking sector, because many jobs are getting automatized actually in the banking sector, on the trading floor or call centers. So it's not about that. We are at the break of the second machine age, what we call the second machine age. The first machine age replaced human labor, the physical human labor, because if you look back 100 years, we were able to manufacture what we could do with our two hands, right? Or 10 people got together, what they could manufacture all together. But the machines came and they replaced. Now that we can manufacture much more than actually what physically we are capable of. And the second machine age is dating back actually in 1992 when Deep Blue, a chess program, beat Garry Kasparov, the world champion in chess. And that was the first moment when software, an artificial intelligence, actually was capable of overcoming human intelligence. And ever since that, we saw Watson, who beat all the Jeopardy players, quiz game, much better. Nobody actually competes against Watson anymore. And now we can see Watson working in hospitals, in oncology. Watson can review 500,000 case studies of oncology patients in a split of a second. Like all the doctors in the world are not capable of reviewing that much information that fast or have that many examples to compare any data to. And Watson is in call centers. You can phone in. There's a pilot project for that for private banking. So if you're a private banking client of one of the largest banks in the US and you actually call in the call center to ask about tips where to invest your money, then it might be a robot who is answering the phone in the voice of a woman or a voice of a man because he knows it better. So yes, these jobs are going to be replaced. Not only in the industry, not only in agriculture, but also in the service sector. And people are afraid, and it's not easier for younger people to adapt rather than older people. However, one thing's for sure, that human nature is adapting very fast. Let me give you another example, elevators. Elevators date back to the 1940s, when they said that, okay, maybe 1930s, when they said that they will make kind of a box that will lift people up to, let's say, a higher level, and you don't need to take the stairs. Then people said that, okay, this is crazy, this is dangerous, people will die, and that's why they put the elevator boy into the elevator. So for decades we had elevator boys just to feel secure when I step into the box, that yes, that will take me, it's not going to fall, I'm not going to die, etc., etc. And I see that as technology is evolving, humans are actually evolving even faster and they are adapting much, much faster. However, I need to say that we created communities, we created society, we created states to help us through these type of transitions. And in these transitions, you do need education, you do need governments to give a lot of support, not only to the young people who will, by the time they graduate, nobody knows what they're going to work on. And what is the most demanded job currently on the planet? It's iOS programming, iOS programmers, which means you are programming mobile applications for an iPhone, right? This is the most demanded job. This market did not exist 5 years ago. It didn't exist. Like somebody would have told me like 6 years ago or 10 years ago when I started my career that, Csaba, you should be an iOS programmer. I was like, what? That's science fiction. Nobody's going to, on the phone, software's on the phone, like what kind of computing capacity do you need for that, right? And now there are 105 billion applications downloaded each and every year, right? So it's the most demanded job. Who knows what the next generation will be working on? Maybe it's going to be space stuff, nobody knows. What And of course, this reflects back to the currently employed people also. So you need to give them education, you need to give them time to adapt to these changes. One of the best practices I ever saw, I was in Denmark giving a lecture 1.5 months ago. And in Denmark, actually, if you want to take some time off and go back to university or go back to school, the state will pay you. So you literally can be a paid student to go back to enhance your knowledge and to be more competitive on the job market. I see a huge difference in Silicon Valley regarding how to implement and think about different type of crazy ideas, even like somebody like saying, oh, I'm going to be teleporting somebody from X to Z location, or levitation, I'm going to make gravity irrelevant, and they got funding. And you don't really see that anywhere else. Like not only here in Central and Eastern Europe, where people tend to be much more skeptical about everything, and we feel it on our daily life, but also if you go to Denmark or if you go to New York even, then people are more skeptical about new innovations and new technologies. However, I see the change in this also. And one of the reasons is that because people by nature know that for major breakthroughs, you need a lot of money. So, if you're talking about going to space, then it was kind of a privilege of states, right, to go to space, like US, Russia, now China, Japan. So it was like really huge, very wealthy states with a lot of ambition, burning a lot of money. If you think about pharmaceuticals, it was the privilege of large corporations, billion-dollar corporations, $100 billion of corporation, because there's so much research and development going into it, and trials and testing, and then you have a new method of curing and a new pharmaceutical drug. And the individual was totally kind of left alone, like incapable of anything. Like if you wanted to do something, you either went to work for the government or a huge government agency such as NASA, or you went to a huge research and development center at a large university with a lot of money, also coming from the state, or you went and you worked for multinationals. However, with the exponential development of technology, with Moore's law, we can see the doubling of computing power. We can see how everything is becoming cheaper and cheaper. The sensors, the robotics, the 3D printers, you can get, Sony PlayStation has actually more computing power than the smartest computer in 1996. And we use it to play video games at home, right? So technology and computing becomes cheaper and cheaper. Thus, it also empowers people. Now companies, not large companies, even small companies, even startups are able to go to space. You see Elon Musk's company, SpaceX. You can also hear about companies such as Moon Express sending, or Pulispace spending, planning to send robots on the moon, right? Which was the privilege of states, now can be done by a team and a group of small people, because actually the environment changed, and because technology is so cheap, it empowers people. And this will change the mentality. It didn't change it yet. In Silicon Valley, because people already did it and they got funding for it, they have the self-esteem. So they believe you. You go there, you say, I'm going to do this. Nobody's questioning you, like, are you capable of doing it? Can you do it? Etc. They will say, okay, I give you money, do the first milestone, and I give you more money, and I give you more money, because they know that it's doable. The rest of the world needs to catch up in mentality, especially in Central and Eastern Europe. If you meet somebody in Central and Eastern Europe and they're going to say like, oh, I'm going to develop a new drug, then everybody's going to say, oh, you're crazy, you cannot do that. Sometimes they even forbid you, that's dangerous, you shouldn't do it, you shouldn't, send stuff to space because it's going to fall on somebody's head, right? However, you can see companies just doing that and changing the world. One of my favorite examples is Prezi. I know the founders of Prezi. And 4 years ago, they went to one of the wealthiest person in Hungary for an angel investment. And the guy was like, what are you doing, guys? I'm like, oh, you know, we want to spread ideas in a totally new format with this presentation tool. Who are your competitors? Well, you know, our competitor is Apple and Microsoft, etc. Google probably is going to come up with something similar. The guy was like, you're crazy. You're totally crazy. I'm not going to give you any money, right? Because you cannot compete against these giant companies. But these guys didn't give up. They went to Silicon Valley, they got the funding, and now they have 40 million users. So 40 million people share their ideas in a totally different way, a totally unconventional way compared to the standard because of them. So this change is capable. I really advise anybody from Bulgaria or Central and Eastern Europe to first build up this self-esteem, build up your confidence that you are capable of doing it. Do the research, put it down in detail, and if they ignore you, if they say that you're crazy, then just, you know, work harder to prove them wrong. When I usually talk about exponential technologies and I talk about, you know, I first start talking about how computing is accelerating and enabling us to develop more data, how to mine the data, how to mine the information and literally turn it into gold, how to tailor-make specific services to our needs, how to read and write DNA, how to build robots, how to build 3D printers, sensor networks, etc., etc. Everybody thinks it's like science fiction. Oh yeah, this is like something people at NASA do, or some people really far away. But actually no, because most of the examples I use, and I also like to mention some of these crazy guys in Bulgaria who are building a spacecraft in their garage. And they are doing it because they are capable of doing it, because all this technology is so cheap. And when I mention these things, then people tend to say like, oh, okay, this is for somebody else, but not for me. And I usually also mention my cousin. My cousin, when she's an artist, she was a great painter. So she went to high school to study painting, then she went to university to study painting. And my family was extremely skeptic. They were saying that you're gonna starve, you're gonna, you know, be poor all your life because you're gonna be an artist, nobody's gonna buy your paintings, etc., etc. But my cousin, who is not really a high-tech person, she discovered the internet, and she discovered that actually she can use her creativity and her painting skills to design things. So she's designing website, logos, objects, etc., etc., and she's selling them online. And now she bought a house in her village, and she moved back, and she's living really well, you know, and the entire family is really surprised, like, how did it happen? Like, how she doesn't even go to work, right? Like, she's sitting at home all day and doing nothing, right? And just playing on the computer, and she's making all this money. And it's because technology is enabling us. So what my advice is for the next generation, and also for the current generation, you know, like stop doing compromises, stop, be realistic to yourself, look in the mirror and ask yourself, what is my hobby? What do I really like to do? What is my passion? Connect to that passion, learn about that passion, figure out a way to connect that passion with technology via the internet. There are 5 billion people, they're going to be 5, currently there are 2 billion people on the internet. By 2020 they're going to be 5 billion people. You can reach with one click 5 billion potential buyers, right? For your product, for your idea. Is it a blog? Is it a tweet? Is it a video you want to share? Is it a picture, a logo, or maybe a spacecraft you designed and you want to share it with the world? You can do it now. So, you know, find your passion, connect to your passion, learn about these technologies. You can go online, you can take any course from MIT online for free. I usually take classes from Stanford University online. Classes I'm really interested in, such as psychology or economics. Classes people pay $12,000, right? I don't need to do anything. I just sit on my laptop 3 hours every week and I learn these classes. And then I apply it. I find a field, I find similar, like-minded, passionate people, not only in my environment, but also on other parts of the world. And I connect to them and we change the world. So I really advise you to do the same.